Hey guys, we are to the last unit, which is about popular genres and pop music in the United States from late 1800s to present. So we're going to cover a lot of different things. And we'll also talk a little bit about the music genre project later on at the end of the PowerPoint. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, So let's see here. Slideshow. This chapter seems like there's a lot of stuff, but a lot of things I'm going to kind of leave for you guys, especially in terms of like rock, country, and other types of genres, because that's going to be, could be what some of your music genre projects are about. Early rock, blues, country music. You could talk about any genre of music from any decade. So we won't really go too far into that. Um, there are a lot of learning objectives for this one. Don't really know why, but I mean, it's not too much different from many of the other chapters that we've done, but I've got key individuals, key terms. Trying to think, especially in terms of, well, with the vocab, just any of the jazz stuff, bebop, big band, swing, syncopation, um, anything like that is important. Um, but yeah, a lot of the stuff for the unit test this time around, like it's pretty straightforward. It's only 10 questions, so but anyway, so what is popular music? And the book kind of gives you this, the text gives you this kind of broad definition: music that is disseminated or distributed widely. So that, that term's kind of up to your interpretation, but basically, anything that is in popular demand. Now, throughout music history, we've been talking a lot about sacred versus secular. That's what we started out with music. Now, once we get into the modern era, there's a lot of this discussion between pop music and art music. So that's kind of the divide, the distinction, I guess you could say, between music now. So you've got lots and lots of different kinds of popular music, and like we talked about with last unit, there's a lot of different art music still out there as well, or classical music, whatever you want to call it. But now it's more, I guess it's more acceptable, or generally we call it art music, because a lot of the classical music now is made for the sake of art, rather than, real entertainment value like it was in centuries past. So, recording technology, playback technology, that really changed things in the 1920s. Um, Music was able to be spread even more widely than it was before. Because before you had printing, that's how you spread music, through the printing of, or in publication of music, like uh, like the sheet music, what you would play. But now, in the 1900s, it's more about vinyl records, CDs, tapes, whether it's 8-track or cassette tapes or whatever. All these different technologies that have been used throughout the 1900s and 2000s. And especially now, where everything's just kind of gone to, it's gone digital, downloading through whatever, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Music, whatever you use. That is now the way that music is shared. A lot of it's through the internet and through downloads, instead of the actual sale of CDs. Although, buying records is still kind of a thing. Buying the vinyl, it's kind of more like a collector's thing, but there are a lot of people that still do it. Um so basically, in this particular chapter, they try to talk about a lot of the artists and music that's like stood the test of time. So um and nowadays, like pop music, it's such a worldwide phenomenon because we talked about, even with the Asian, we talked about the different Asian cultures. Japan, like their pop music very much mirrors our own. They've got the second largest popular music industry over there. They've got rock, rap, pop, the pop genre. Um, so it's not just us. It is a worldwide phenomenon, but for the sake of this chapter and pretty much for the sake of the project, try to stick to like American things. If there's something European or whatever culture that interests you, go for it. Like, I mean, I don't really care, but you know, don't go too crazy. All right, so in the book, in the textbook, it talks about ragtime first. So we're going to go through a lot of the jazz things, because ragtime, jazz, like that, really, that kind of music inspired um, a lot of the popular genres that came after it, especially the blues, R&B, early rock, early country. They take a lot of their style kind of comes from things heard in ragtime and in early jazz and such. So ragtime, this is late 1800s. It's a basically a style of piano playing, and it uses a lot of syncopation. And syncopation, that's where the music emphasizes like the offbeats. So not strong beats like 1 and 3, but off beats, weak beats 2 and 4, or even like not even emphasizing the main beats, like emphasizing 1 and 2 and 3 and like the actual off beats. um so syncopation, you'll read it's attributed a lot to the musical traditions of West Africa, which we talked about, a lot of those complex rhythms. And that's kind of where a lot of this ragtime jazz, a lot of that grew from traditions brought over by the slaves to places like New Orleans, that whole like Mississippi Delta kind of region. And ragtime, it kind of came from that region. It really became popular a little bit further west, like in the Midwest, especially like the Missouri region. Kansas City, St. Louis, like those are real big areas for ragtime. So Scott Joplin is the guy that's mentioned in the textbook, one of the guys, and he's considered the king of ragtime. Born in Texas, lived in New York City for a while, died there. He even wrote an instructional book called The School of Ragtime. Wrote some of the most famous ragtime pieces like the Maple Leaf Rag and the Entertainer, um, a lot of which, his music was used in the Oscar winning film The Sting in the 1970s. And it, that film, I think it even won best score for, and a lot of the ragtime tunes were incorporated into the score. He also wrote one very interesting opera called Treemonisha. But anyway, Scott Joplin, you guys will listen to The Entertainer, played on a piano from that era when it would have been composed and when it would have been heard. Because late 1800s, very early 1900s, that's when ragtime uh, was popular. it didn't last very long. Like we've mentioned a lot with in the modern era, that the the things that were popular only stayed popular for about 10, 20 years, and then they kind of moved on to other things. Case in point, so after ragtime kind of faded away, you had the blues and you had jazz music kind of start up. So blues, the term, it has one of two or maybe both um, origins. So blue devils is a phrase that was used back during this particular time, early 1900s, late 1800s, referring to feelings of sadness and suffering. Um, and there's also this link to West African cultures where um, people in mourning would use the blue indigo plant to dye their garments blue. So it's kind of a both like a color association and like a phrase of speech sort of association. But wherever it came from, that's what we know. It's called the blues, and usually these songs are about uh, sad times, hardship, grief, and they are very much like they take a lot of inspiration from like African American work songs, field songs, spirituals. They have a very similar kind of sound and kind of form to them. In particular, like the blues has like a very specific form, and it's called the 12 bar blues. And it's like a very specific like harmonic progression. You usually have like this 4 bar progression of you got chord, chord, chord. Sometimes you get a little adventurous. You might throw in like an extra chord here or there, but these 12 bars are repeated, and that's kind of the basic structure of just the blues song. The 12 bar blues kind of influenced a lot of early jazz, and it's used a lot in especially like rock and other pop songs because the like any kind of popular song just has like a very basic formula. It has like that ABA kind of structure where everything's repeated. Um, and yeah, it's that. So that's kind of where they get um, that structure from. It's from the blues. Um, the textbook doesn't mention W.C. Handy. His picture's down at the bottom here. But he was like the father of the blues, one of the first uh, composers and performers of the blues. He kind of took ragtime music and integrated this blues style. So he pretty much formed the blues from ragtime, which is kind of cool. You can see a direct correlation here between the two different kinds of music. And same thing, the blues, it still comes from that same kind of area. Memphis, that's kind of the birthplace of the blues is Memphis, but also in that Mississippi Delta region. Along with ragtime, St. Louis was also a popular place for the blues to be performed. And W.C. Handy wrote a tune called St. Louis Blues in 1914, and this was one of the first successful blues tunes. So this is kind of when it turned into a pop tune. And this is should be a video of W.C. Handy performing St. Louis Blues way way back on black and white on the Ed Sullivan Show. So this would have been what, probably early, probably really early 1950s because he died in 1958. So all right, but that'll be cool getting to hear that. And then also kind of a contemporary, you got BB King, like one of the all-time greats, great guitarist and great singer-songwriter. This is one of his most famous songs, How Blue Can You Get? So you can hear like the original and you can hear a contemporary version. So that'll be really cool. Now, the birth of jazz. So, you've got Memphis, St. Louis for ragtime and the blues, New Orleans, that's jazz. That is the home, the birthplace of jazz. And one of the main reasons that was the birthplace is just because of all of the um, I guess just a mixture of different types of people there. So you have a huge slave population there. You've got the Creole population. The Creole, they're French descent. They have very distinct kind of styles of music as well, like Zydeco, which is I mean, it has jazz kind of feelings to it. It's very syncopated, and it uses different kinds of instruments like the accordion, sometimes string instruments like fiddles, like violins, fiddles, and other things. So um, you just have this fusion of things. Um, and in New Orleans, you probably had a lot of these like old marching instruments from the Civil War and other things like that. So people just kind of took what they were able to find and started up bands playing this new kind of music. And it's a fusion of European kind of harmonies, the Creole stuff, along with West African influences, spirituals, the blues, like all of that stuff just kind of mixed together to create jazz. Um, and also give, the definition for swing, because jazz, like the distinction, it's syncopated rhythms, but also it's swung. And basically that kind of means that it sounds a little lazy. Like we'll say, oh, you gotta, the backbeat kind of gets the emphasis, but it's just the best way to describe it is that it's just it's like a bounce to the music that gives it kind of a laid back, kind of lazy feel to it. Um, Jazz music, relies a lot on improvisation, so coming up with music on the spot. At first it was written kind of for dance music. You had Dixieland bands. That was kind of the first um, form of jazz. And that was developed in New Orleans during the 20th century. It features all the things we talked about, the syncopated rhythms, the improvised solos, the blues form with those types of harmonies, and then the instrumentation. Like then, this is coming from the old marching bands. You got trumpet, clarinet, saxophone, trombone, tuba. You've got banjos, guitar, piano, and drums. In the Dixieland bands, you got like the marching drums, but eventually that would turn into the drum set. And of course, you can't really talk about jazz without mentioning Louis Armstrong. Um, 1901 to 1971, famed trumpeter, singer, composer. He started out in New Orleans. He had a very awful early life. Ended up in like a home for troubled kids because he got arrested and stuff. But thankfully he ended up there because while he was there, he began playing the trumpet in like in a band at that place, and the rest is kind of history. He started out in New Orleans, moved to Chicago, and then New York City. Um, New Orleans is the birthplace of jazz. Then Chicago kind of came next. You got the migration, further north, and then of course New York City, like in Harlem, that kind of became the second home of jazz music, the with the Harlem Renaissance and all that stuff. Um, Armstrong, he's also known for his scat singing. He's one of the first to kind of develop that. Ella Fitzgerald would do it too. Billie Holiday, a lot of the famous jazz singers would incorporate scat singing. That was a way for them to improvise because you can't really, it would be really difficult to improvise like a whole new set of lyrics to a song. So they would just come up with different noises and sounds to make with their voices. And that was their way to improvise. Um, so you guys will listen to West End Blues, written in 1928. It wasn't written by um, Louis Armstrong, but um, he performed like I guess you could say like the most famous recording of this particular tune, and it's one that he performed a lot. And I don't think you, I don't think it's in the video. I don't think you see the video, but this is actually him performing it with his band. So there's that. And then after Dixieland and the very early jazz, you've got the big band movement, the swing movement. Um, and this was like during the 1930s, 1940s. Jazz was the most popular music in the country by then, and big bands, the swing music as they call it, like that was the most common type of jazz music. And you've got these two behemoths of this type of music, Glenn Miller, Duke Ellington, and others like Count Basie's mentioned in the textbook, Billy Strayhorn, who was in Duke Ellington's band. Gosh, so many others, like too many to name. But a lot of the big band stuff, the big bands like kind of um, like solidified the instrumentation that would normally be used in jazz bands. You got saxophones, trombones, trumpets, and a rhythm section. The rhythm section is piano, bass, drum set, sometimes a guitar, and then you could also have vocalists. Some big bands would include clarinet, like Glenn Miller always had a clarinet in his. So it just kind of would depend on the person. Um, a lot of the swing music was danceable, so they played a lot of dance tunes, performed concerts, all that kind of stuff. So Glenn Miller, interestingly enough, only lived to be 40 because he was the band leader of like an army jazz band during World War II. And in 1944, they were on a plane going to some performance, and they never made it. That plane disappeared. They never found it, never recovered it. So he wrote a lot of really great tunes. I think you guys will listen to "In the Mood," um, but it's sad because he could have written a lot more because he died pretty young. Now, Duke Ellington. Duke is not his real name, but you got Duke, you got Count. Yeah, a lot of these guys they were given nicknames. But Duke, he was the Duke of Jazz. Duke Ellington's probably the greatest jazz composer of all time. Not just his time, but of all time. His music, he composed thousands of tunes, and his music has stood the test of time. It's performed constantly still. It's still some of the most popular types of jazz music, and his legacy continues even through places like the jazz orchestra, jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. Their group formed in his name. They have an Ellington competition every single year where hundreds, probably thousands of like high school jazz bands record his music and send it in for a chance to go to New York to the Lincoln Center. It's really cool. And you guys, for him, you'll get to see a video of "It Don't Mean a Thing," which is one of his most famous tunes. And in these videos, that like this is the real Glenn Miller group, and then here you also like this is Ellington's orchestra. So that is one cool thing about this. Like you'll actually get to see the performers and hear them actually perform. Now, along with the band leaders, you've got really popular vocalists of the time. Um, Ella Fitzgerald, one of the greatest. Also, Billie Holiday. Just amazing. There were some amazing jazz vocalists during this time. Ella Fitzgerald's probably, I mean, one of the most famous. She had a very clear tone to her voice, wide vocal range, and collaborated with all the jazz artists of the time. She also recorded all of like the big like American tunes. It's called the American Songbook. She recorded all of those at one point, and she won 14 Grammys and a whole bunch of other awards. She was just an amazing singer. Um, you guys will get to listen to Ella sing "Summertime," which is from George Gershwin's opera Porgy and Bess. So it's a jazzy tune, but it's also kind of a operatic musical. It's not really opera. It's more like a musical. But anyway, it's still a good one. And then of course you got like Frank Sinatra, who started out doing jazzy kind of big band vocalists, um, and then acting. He and still recorded songs. I mean, it's kind of difficult to. I'm not sure exactly what genre Frank Sinatra falls into. It's kind of the crooner, like whatever that genre is called. But one of the greatest, lived to be 82. He was inspired by Bing Crosby, of course, another great crooner. Um, he recorded with both Columbia Records and Capitol Records, which were the big, like two of the big record companies back then. Um, Sinatra won like so many different awards. Like he won an Oscar, was nominated for another one, won so many different things. Um, Acted in so many different movies, and that was all before even he did a lot of the Rat Pack stuff, which he's I guess most well known for. But yeah, such an amazing vocalist and amazing talent in general. So for those, like I mentioned, Ella with Summertime, Frank with one of his most iconic songs, My Way. Um, so those are pretty cool. Then, of course, you've got back to jazz. So you've got kind of, I guess, what you could call like modern jazz. So 40s and 50s, big band kind of gives way. The people start to do more smaller ensembles because it just wasn't financially, like people weren't able to keep paying all these big 20 30 piece bands to play music. So you go to smaller combos like three maybe four people. And this is where people like Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Bird, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, a lot of them come into play. And you've got several different kinds of styles of jazz going on. First, you've got bebop, which is very stark contrast to big band. It's fast, high energy. It's not supposed to be danced to. Everything's complex. The rhythms, the harmonies, the melodies aren't necessarily singable, but there's some good melodies. Um, but that's like Charlie Parker. That's Dizzy Gillespie. They were, best known for that. And you'll actually watch a video with both of them. They're playing the tune called Hot House. So that's Bird and Dizzy. And sad because Charlie Parker, he was only 34 years old. It's all because of drugs. He got hooked on the crack. Um, really, really sad. Dizzy and others lived a lot longer. I think even into the 90s. But yeah, he died really, really young. Just such a fantastic player. Really sad. And then after bebop, so that only lasted maybe about a decade. Then you got Miles Davis and John Coltrane coming in. Miles Davis kind of embodies like the cool jazz. So it's like a more laid back, it's relaxed. You got relaxed tempos, a lighter tone. There's more structure in it. It's not just about more and more, faster, faster, and all that stuff. Some of my favorite jazz actually comes from this era. Miles Davis is probably one of my favorite jazz performers, and his album "Kind of Blue" is just one of the greatest jazz albums of all time. Um, but Miles and Coltrane, they did a lot of collaborating together, and I figured it'd be a good idea to let you guys hear them. So you'll hear one of their famous tunes called "So What," and that's I think the video actually shows them as well. So that'll be really cool. Coltrane started with cool jazz, but he kind of went more like an experimental route. um, did this album called Giant Steps, which you guys will listen to on the listening assignment. Um, it's really great, but some of the just kind of wacky stuff that he ended up doing sounded very similar to a lot of the experimental, like modern art music that was going on at the time. So there's a correlation between that too with jazz and art music, which jazz, call it a popular genre, but it's a form of art music too. Like it's yeah, it's art music. But anyway, you then, like, after all this, like, you have other things like fusion, where you're getting into the 60s, the 70s, even into the 1980s, and these other big popular genres like rock and all these, like, they are bringing in jazz influences. Um, the textbook mentions Weather Report, the band, and their song Birdland, which is a great tune made famous by Maynard Ferguson, a really famous trumpet player. But Weather Report, they did their own version of Birdland. I think it was either the 70s or the 80s. And that's an example of the fusion, fusing jazz and rock styles together. So you guys can listen to that if you want to. I mean, it's pretty good. I love Birdland. It's one of my favorite tunes, but not necessarily that rendition. um, so quickly, the textbook goes into the three R's: rock, R&B, and rap. And all of these borrow different things from jazz, gospel, the blues, country, because country came before this as well. I don't know why they went straight from jazz into rock, R&B, and rap, but whatever. Um, but anyway, so you got some general elements of contemporary popular music. So, is the music easy to listen to? Are the melodies and lyrics important? Does it have a simple structure, like we talked about, ABA, and a strong melody? Is the melody singable? That's kind of the main thing. Singable and repetitive. So catchy. So you're going to remember it. Strong beat, clear phrases, so clear structure, and then simple harmony. Like, you don't want something that's going to sound really harsh or really dissonant and drive people away. You want it to sound good, basically. So, with R&B, the term rhythm and blues was first used in 1948. And this is from the textbook. So originally, it refers to music recorded by Black musicians and intended for use by the African American community. Is that still true today? I mean, I think in some cases, but I think nowadays everybody kind of can enjoys R&B and all different kinds of music. But if you think back to some of the, like, early R&B artists. I mean, you got Ray Charles, you got, I think, Motown, like all of that would be considered part of R&B. Um, and it's great that that those places like Motown was able to happen, especially at a time like during the 1940s, the 50s, and the 60s, because this was a time before and during like the civil rights movement. So yeah, I think that probably plays a big role in the separation, definitely. But um, that's a discussion for another time. Um, and here early R&B tunes use the 12 bar blues. That's correlation between the blues as well and jazz, all of it, just all of it. um, Rock, directly came from R&B. It's kind of a mixture of R&B and country. um, Country is kind of specifically like southern. You could kind of say rock is like a faster paced country without the southern accent and the R&B structure. So yeah. But rock, marketed and consumed towards teenagers. They established like a particular group. Like you got the vocalist, you got guitar, bass, drums, any combination of that drum set. And there are such a wide variety of subgenres, and rock probably had the biggest cultural impact out of all these early genres, especially when you think about Elvis and the Beatles and all those people. Just kind of, again, that whole worldwide phenomenon idea. And then of course you got rap. So rap is the youngest, and rap, a lot of times, you like hip hop and rap, like people think of hip hop and rap as being interchangeable, but it really isn't, because hip hop started in the 70s. It grew out of the tradition of like DJing, emceeing, working the turntable stuff, the break dancing tradition, and all of that. That's where rap kind of came from. Like it started there. And of course, rap, it's a form of spoken word delivered over a beat. So it kind of started with the emceeing and all that stuff, and then developed into its own genre kind of towards the end of the 1970s, but really in the 80s. The textbook mentions Rapper's Delight as like the first, I guess, important kind of mainstream rapped song. Origins in the Bronx. Link to disco. I like that. I mean, yeah, I guess just from the beat, like kind of the style of music. I mean, if you think back to like early soul music and funk like that, that's kind of like disco-esque. So yeah, like rap does kind of come from that, but it's very different. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I understand the origin, but yeah, it doesn't always sound the same. And then of course sampling. So that's a good term to remember. So a technique in which a clip from a pre-existing song is isolated and looped underneath the rapper. Lots of rap artists today they'll sample classical tunes like Mozart, Beethoven. There was one rap song that used uh, a kind of an obscure sampling. It was from a Tchaikovsky symphony. It's the fourth movement of Tchaikovsky's Symphony Number 4. And I only know it because I played it and I've listened to that symphony so many times. And I heard it, I was like, hey, I know that. So it's kind of cool. But, it is kind of a thing, where sampling classical music, jazz, like any kind of older art music is kind of popular now. Um, and of course, you can't really talk about rap music without mentioning Snoop, Tupac. Um, Ice Cube, I mean, Dre, there, oh gosh, so many. Um, I mean, you could even bring like some of the old hip hop artists like Run DMC. I mean, yeah, just a lot of those pioneers. Those are people that you guys will be able to choose from. So I'm not really going to talk about them. You guys can do that in your presentations. Kind of the same thing with with the rock, the R&B, the folk, and the country. This really is just so you know, like folk music, broad term used to describe a wide variety of musical forms that developed within different cultures. Yeah, that means pretty much anything that can be folk music. But I guess if you think like contemporary folk, Bob Dylan, who there's pictures up here, I mean, that's a good example. That's the example the textbook gives. Um, but here are some other examples like ballads. Bob Dylan wrote a lot of ballads. So a ballad tells a story that usually contains some kind of moral or some kind of lesson. Work songs are folk songs, children's songs, protest songs, dance, even dance music. And this is like early dance music, like two step, square dance, waltzes, like that kind of stuff. That, is considered folk music. And then, of course, country. I mean, you have so many different subgenres of country music nowadays, and country music is really old, probably as old as the blues. They probably started about the same time. Um, and like I mentioned before, so it originated in the American South. So it usually has something to do with the South, sung with a Southern accent. Western themed songs are considered country. Cowboy songs, those are kind of the exception. Um, but yeah, it's usually a distinctive style with a very Southern accent. And the guitars are twangy, use of banjo and other very Southern folky. Banjo is also folk too. So, and then of course you also have like Mumford and Sons, who were like a mixture of folk and rock and whatnot. So alternative. So yeah, nowadays using a particular instrument doesn't necessarily mean you're country or rock. It's just kind of the the way that kind of the context, like the way that you use it or the kind of music that you perform. And of course, here you got the Man in Black, Johnny Cash. Um, One of the few country singers that I enjoy. I'm not a big country fan, but to each their own. You guys want to do country? Go for it. And then, of course, you got music for the stage. Like this is an option too. Musicals, like that's a valid option because it's art music, but it's also popular music because it is consumed at a much higher rate than like saying going to the symphony and stuff like that. Um, the textbook mentions Rogers and Hammerstein. They were kind of the first like power duo um, of musicals. They did Oklahoma, Carousel, South Pacific, The King and I, The Sound of Music, the Cinderella musical, all amazing. And there are movie adaptations of all those. They won lots of awards, 34 Tonys, 15 Oscars, two Pulitzer Prizes, and two Grammys. And that's just the ones that are mentioned. They won other awards too, but it's just amazing. Yeah, so they were really great. And of course you got so many modern musicals like Hamilton. Think of Les Mis or Phantom of the Opera or even like Sweeney Todd. Sondheim's musicals are amazing. Gosh, so many to choose from. So if anybody's interested in doing musicals, you could pick like a style, a composer, an era, whatever you want to do for musicals. That's an option. Another great uh, person, musical writer, was Leonard Bernstein, who was really a great composer, but he was also the conductor of the New York Philharmonic for many years, and wrote West Side Story. So one of the most important musicals of our time. He also wrote Candide, but that one isn't as well known as West Side Story. But anyway, that's the text in a nutshell. So here, this is just listing some of the ones that I could think of that I could find, but there are so many different genres and subgenres to choose from. So, number one, pick something that you like, something that you want to listen to, that you might know something about. And then, like I mentioned before, um, pick artists where you're going to be able to find information about them. Don't pick people that are obscure and there's not even a Wikipedia page to go look at. You got to make sure that there is information about them. Um, like I said, it doesn't have to be all new stuff. You could do gospel music, you can do Motown, you can do funk, you can do disco, you can do any type of Latin music, you can do all the different kinds of country, you can do jazz, musicals, you can do any type of like Christian uh, music, dance, like techno, electronic dance, any style like that. You can do any type of indie music, whether it's indie rock or indie whatever, or just pick popular, like um, pick a decade of popular music and focus on um, pop music from the 80s, Madonna, Michael Jackson. Those are two huge artists there, and you can find so much information on them, or you could pick, like, you could go back even further, like the Jackson 5. I mean, just be creative in what you do. And I guess I should go on to the next slide. So this has all the instructions. The instructions are listed in the unit itself. Basically, for the project, you have to choose a genre that you're going to research and present. So you're going to create a PowerPoint. You can do Google Slides or whatever you want to do, but you got to create something to present in a video. And I give you a list of information that you can include. So research the genre, like rock. When was it created? When did it become popular? Like, what are the characteristics of rock and roll? Who are the pioneers? Like, who are some of the most famous artists from that genre? Um, who are the important artists now? Or if you choose a particular decade, like, who are the most important artists from that decade? And then you're supposed to like focus in after that on like two or three artists. It just kind of depends on how much information you can find on each one. So make sure you research their background. What are their famous songs? And then you got to share one song with us. Okay. And then also, share with us why you like that artist. Why do you think they're important? Just, all that basic stuff. Now, recording your presentation. So there is a way to do that on PowerPoint, and I'll show you hopefully. Um, you see this button right here. It says record slideshow. You can actually record the slideshow that way. And just once you're done, just upload that whole file to the discussion board in Blackboard. You can also use Zoom. That's what I use. It's really good. You create an account for free through your Augusta Tech email. You're only doing like 5 minutes, so as long as you don't go, like, you're never going to go over the amount where you need to pay. So you use it for free. Create the. You can record it. You can share screen like I do. And once you stop the recording, it generates a video. You can upload that video. Um, Now, if you want to get fancy, like, you can record this on Zoom or QuickTime or your phone or whatever, and you can use something like iMovie or whatever you have to edit and do things like post production stuff. Um, Now with Zoom or any other thing, like, we all have phones that can record. So at least you can just use your phone to record the video, the presentation, um, and just, upload the video. But with things like Zoom, you can use it on your phone, your computer, whatever. And especially if you have Apple products like an iPhone, iPad, or Apple computer, they all come with something like iMovie. So you can record it, you can edit stuff you need to in iMovie, and then you just click like generate the video for YouTube, Facebook. Boom, it does it for you. Um, and you could always, like, if you want to get really cool or crazy, like the stuff that I do, like you can actually put it as an unlisted video on YouTube and share the link in the discussion board. I don't really care what you do, just as long as it is shared. That's kind of the main thing. So, you can look at the rubric that I have in the unit. You get 20 points total from that rubric. You get gosh, I think 5 points just for turning in the project, and then you get another five for like going through and commenting on like two or three other posts in the discussion board. So it's like 30 total points. Um, and it's not that big of a deal. I mean, pretty much as long as you do the project, as long as you make sure you do everything, like you're going to get a good grade. So, I mean, yeah, I want you to put some effort into it, but also, I I understand, like, we all have lives. We all have other things to do. So just, you know, it's only about 5 minutes. I say 5 to 10, but really it's not going to take you that long. It's about 5 minutes. You put together a little PowerPoint or a little presentation. Just you can point your phone camera at the computer, at the slide or whatever, and then you don't even have to point the camera at yourself. You can just point it at the slide as long as we can hear you talking about it. That's cool. So, you know, do the best you can. If you have issues uploading things to Blackboard, we can figure that out later on. But you have any other issues or questions, you can email me. But just remember, like, this isn't due until like, well, I would say get it done as soon as you can, but it's not due until like exams, and that's December 10th, 12th, something like that. So you've got plenty of time to work on it. There's not going to be anything new, any other units. So, um, yeah, just let me know if you guys have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer things and hopefully be able to help you out if needed. So, enjoy, have fun, try to have fun with the project. Like I said, pick things that you like, pick music genres that you enjoy and that you think you'll enjoy talking about and listening to and finding out more about it. So, anyway, have fun, and see you guys later.